is Notsam Wrestling.
Introducing your host from New York, here is Sam Roberts.
Joining us now, somebody that I've known for a long time. And you know, I love people in this crazy world of entertainment that can figure out how to not only attach their love and their passion for professional wrestling to it, but see it through. You know what I mean? Like over the course of that career, continue to have professional wrestling be a part of the journey. And Andrew Goldstein, for you, I feel like throughout the years, I mean, it starts, of course, early when you're writing for you're in WWE creative at a pretty young age. But I feel like as your career's progressed and you're a showrunner and you're producing shows and you're writing and everything, you've done a really interesting job at always having wrestling projects be a part of what you're doing.
Yeah, man. Well, first off, thank you for having me. I appreciate the platform, and obviously a huge fan of everything you're doing. Yeah, dude, my joke has been wrestling keeps finding me. Like, 15 years ago, I answered an ad on a job aggregator site and got on WWE Creative. That's a very truncated version of the story, but that's basically what happened.
Mm-hmm.
And, here we are 15 years later with a couple stops in between where I got to do some cool stuff with wrestling where, yeah, basically never in my life did I think my career would ever intersect with the story of the Von Erichs and the story of Gino Hernandez and the story of Bruiser Brody. So growing up, the WWE was my outward fandom, but this is so cheesy, but my heart was really with the territories. Like I grew up in the magazine era. I grew up, so excited to flip the channel from Superstars and Challenge to JCP on Channel 17 in Philadelphia at noon or 1 o'clock, and then then on Saturday night, like getting up from the dinner table because this weird Channel 48 had World Class, and I had to like jiggle the bunny ears. So that's from like age 8 to now, like to get to talk about things like the Road Warriors and Bruiser Brody and all of that has just been such a thrill. And obviously we'll get into the format and what the show is and stuff, but what you said is exactly right. I just keep the universe keeps putting me and wrestling together.
So it's not so, because that's what I was wondering with you. It's not so much like that you're seeking out, or maybe it is. Like, do you seek out networks that are doing wrestling-related stuff to go like, hey, I mean, I kind of have an expertise and a passion at this. I can be connected to it. Or is it kind of the other way around where, you're kind of known as a person who knows how to do television and also gets and loves wrestling, so your name comes up in those conversations?
So, two answers to that. What you just said is exactly what happened on Darkside of the Ring Confidential.
Mm-hmm.
A friend of mine at Vice who was Action Bronson's producer on Fuck That's Delicious for all those years, I reached out to him because I was in between gigs. And I said, hey, man, would love to reconnect. And he was like, look, I have nothing for you now, but I know the Darkside of the Ring guys are looking for somebody. And he connected us. And basically they said to me, you're a unicorn. Like we've been trying to find somebody who has the sort of talk showrunner experience, but also has the like depth of knowledge and respect for wrestling to bring it together. Because, during the first 2 seasons, they did an after show.
Right.
That didn't really work out that well. Not for lack of trying by anybody on those production teams, but it was there was just sort of a disconnect between like the knowledge needed to kind of like contextualize what needs to be talked about. And so they we were put in touch and they trusted me to help them expand on the stories that they already told. And it was really cool. But to your original point, like I did 4 years at Spike TV where I really learned how to I transitioned from writer to producer in those 4 years at Spike. And while I was there, they were already making TNA. And so I kind of just raised my hand and said, "Hey guys, I'm here doing other things, but if you need anybody, any help, I've been a wrestling fan since '86." And so then they threw me on the weekly episodic promos for Impact. I got to do the Wrestling Matters, the campaign change where they changed from TNA to Impact Wrestling. I did that whole campaign, got to spend a week with Hogan. It was really cool stuff. So, and then, I just 2 years ago, I was an executive at Endeavor Audio, which was the podcast arm of William Morris Endeavor. And it just so happened that they had just signed the deal with WWE to launch their podcast network.
Right.
So it was like, again, kismet, like it just keeps happening. I wasn't looking for it. It finds me. So a little 5 of one or 2. What is it? 6 of one, half dozen of the other.
That's the one. Yeah. Although sometimes sometimes it's 5. Who's counting? Like, what are we nitpicking here? Come on.
We're wrestling fans. We're not supposed to know math.
Yeah, exactly. But it's you triggered something in my memory though when you were just talking about like your love for the territories, because it really is. We're about the same age, and like the magazine era was really that. It was this era. It was like right before the internet, when I remember that, like when TL Hopper debuted in WWE, I was excited because I knew Dirty White Boy Tony Anthony from Pro Wrestling Illustrated, and I was like, I've seen pictures of this guy, but I've never seen him wrestle. And I didn't realize that TL Hopper wasn't actually going to be, designed to display what this athlete can do as much as what other athletes could do. But when you were talking about finding territories on like your TV set and messing with the bunny ear antennas and stuff like that, I literally just remembered, because I would have told you I grew up a WWE fan, hardcore WWE fan, always been a hardcore WWE fan, always will be a hardcore WWE fan. But also I was all about the magazines, and then I got more into the territories when I was in high school, and I was tape trading, because like I completely fell in love with World Class when I started getting all those tapes. But I haven't thought about this part of it in 25 years or more.
I love it.
I remember we'd go on road trips. Like, my dad never liked spending money on plane tickets. So every summer when we would go to Detroit and we'd go to Kentucky and we'd go all over the place, he would just load us all into the car and we'd go on road trips. And a lot of times we'd stay overnight at motels in like Ohio or wherever the midpoint was. And I'm just now remembering how exciting it would be when every now and then, because it wasn't like it is now, where you'd go and it's like this kind of networked cable system that every Hilton has. It'd be like you could get the local channels,
Right.
And every now and then you could tap in to a local television station, and they would have some kind of local wrestling territory, and you would lose your mind, because it's like this whole other thing has been sitting here the whole time, and for this one night. Because, like, we're going to get back on the road tomorrow, but tonight I get to live in this, and I'd be glued to whatever little weird local territory that was, just as the territories were starting to kind of completely go out of business.
I legit, get chills thinking about things like that, because for me, the magazines were everything, man. Like, my dad would take me to 7-Eleven or what were called news agencies. They were like basically like smoke shops, but also that had every magazine imaginable.
Yeah.
And I'm like 8, 9, 10, 11 years old, and I'm handing my dad this like stack of magazines, all of which had like gruesomely bloody pictures of Dusty Rhodes and Carlos Colon. And, like, the other thing too is like, yeah, I got to see Dusty because I got NWA, but there's a whole litany of wrestlers that I never, ever had any opportunity to ever see work until YouTube. Like Ox Baker and Bruiser Brody, Carlos Colon, and all these these guys that were on the covers of all these magazines, like the Sheep Herders. Like, I didn't see them until, I found World Class randomly. And I was WWF and WWE entertained me, and that was like what I went to school talking about. But like my hidden, obsession was like wondering about the fabulous ones, you know, and who they were, and why can't I ever see them, and are they as good as they look, and you know, reading the territory top tens in all the magazines,
Yeah.
and seeing which wrestlers crossed over, and be like, wait, if he's in Mid-South, how's he also in the NWA? And like, you know, expanding my mind to understand the territories, and what, you know, oh man, I would love to live in Texas for a year and get to watch World Class like on my TV as it happens.
Yeah,
And
because
go see wrestling at the Sportatorium.
oh, I know. Because there's this feeling of like exploration. You were like, oh, there's more to this than just tuning it in on my television set. Like, I mean, you know, like I was like you. I'd go, it was the stationery store living in New York. It was just called the stationery store, but it would be like, yeah, it was a smoke shop, and you could buy candy and notebooks and every magazine imaginable. And like every month it would be WWE magazine, WCW magazine, Inside Wrestling, The Wrestler, Pro Wrestling Illustrated. I mean, Main Event magazine, if you go back long enough.
Remember Wrestling Eye? Wrestling Eye had the bloodiest covers.
That I'm sure, yeah.
Wrestling Eye was my jam, and I don't think it was an aftermag, but Wrestling Eye always had like these like jabroni-looking women's wrestlers on, you know, in them and stuff, like, and they all like Crystal Blue, something, you know, they all had like these crazy names, and yeah, man, I was really obsessed with things like the Fantastics and these stories like Ox Baker killed a guy in a ring with the heart punch. Like,
yeah,
I was fascinated as a child reading those stories.
Yeah, me too. And I remember, I think I might have been like a freshman in high school when, or maybe I was younger, maybe it was middle school, when a friend of mine had this like big hardcover book. I think, I don't know if Apter or somebody associated with the Apter magazines put it out. I think somebody did. But it was like a hardcover book, and I think it was called This Is Wrestling or something like that. It was like a white cover, and it was just like pictures.
I had it.
Yeah, okay, you know exactly the book I'm talking about.
I had it.
It was the first time I'm looking through it, and I look at this picture, and it's the Bushwhackers, but they're mean, and they're bloody, and they're violent, and I'm like, what is this? Because I'd never even known there was an I didn't know what the sheep herders were. I didn't know. I thought one day God created the Bushwhackers, and they just showed up, and they were licking kids' heads, and that was it. And when I saw that, I was like, oh my God.
And that was the cool part about watching WWF at the time, because you would just turn on Superstars or Challenge, and you'd either see a vignette or you'd see them debut. You'd see Kerry Von Erich. You'd see the sheep herders. You'd see Dusty, but they were these, you know, sort of PG-13 versions. But you had that secret knowledge that you knew, like, oh no, these guys are actually really serious, like Terry Funk.
Yeah.
You had this like secret knowledge that other kids didn't know.
Yeah.
And so like I would go to school and they would be talking about Texas Tornado, and I'd be like, did you know that he has 5 other brothers, and they used to dominate Texas, and the Freebirds, and the double, you know, the heel turn.
And that's not an easy thing to do. Like, to be that kid before the internet, you had to put your work in.
Creative champions. But it was great. You sound like such a get off my lawn type of guy, but it's just like young fans don't get the like, I feel for them because they don't have that like that fascination with seeing a magazine and having no opportunity to actually see these guys work. And so the mystique created just from flipping through a magazine and seeing these covers, because now a kid can hear about a wrestler like a Will Ospreay and just type his name into YouTube and see every match he's ever done. But to this day, I've never seen a Colonel De Beers match.
Right.
But I know everything about the guy's career. I've never watched him work.
Yeah. Yeah, of course you do. Yeah, I mean, that's why I got so excited when Darkside of the Ring first came out. That's why, I mean, I've had those guys on the podcast a bunch of times. And that's why I'm so excited about that you guys are redoing some of the better docs, although I love them all, with even more information. Because it's not so much like, I think a lot of people get caught up on the dark side part of it, like where they go like, oh, this is the scandal, and I want to know what the seedy side of it and what's really going on. And like, for me, like, that's not it. For me, I'm losing my mind because on this mainstream cable channel, There's a documentary about Bruiser Brody, or there's a documentary about Herb Abrams. When they were like, we're doing a Herb Abrams episode, I lost my mind. And it's not because you want the seedy underbelly. We're finally going to know the truth. It's because there's going to be a cable channel on television that's putting out a really good Herb Abrams documentary by a couple of guys who like live and breathe this stuff, that are going to do right by this amazing wrestling story.
That was the coolest part. One of the coolest parts was like just working with Evan and Jason and getting to know them. And I mean, those dudes have such a respect for the stories they're telling. They have such an appreciation for the talent that they're making relations with, starting relationships with. And they have such care for these stories, and they are not salacious, looking for that like real true crimey, they want to like uncover something. They just want to tell these stories to a larger audience, because they realized in trying to pitch a scripted series that there isn't enough education in the world, that wrestling isn't just what happens in the ring. And so a big part of, and a thing they talk about often at the table on Confidential, is how part of what they wanted to do with Darkside of the Ring is to educate non-wrestling fans, or sort of light wrestling fans, or fans who were fans and, lapsed wrestling fans, of like, here's the backstage, here's how it works, here's the language they speak, here are the politics, here is the drama, here's the fallout that happens to a family when somebody decides to be a wrestler. They wanted to tell those stories, which those stories cross all lines into TV drama, into TV comedy, into true crime, all of that. Like, all of those stories are human stories. It's not just about the guy putting on his boots and putting on his tights and winning title belts and cutting promos. It's about everything else. And that's sort of their, I mean, if I could speak for them, I think that's really one of their main goals in doing Darkside of the Ring, is to educate people that wrestling is like this like drama-filled genre outside of what you just see on TV.
Well, yeah, and I mean, it's amazing that my favorite part is that they do it in a way where a non-wrestling fan will get as much out of it as they would any other documentary. I could put this on for my wife, and like, it's a story at the end of the day. It happens to be in the world of wrestling, but it's a story. But they also do it in a way where a wrestling fan still doesn't feel like they're being spoken down to. Like, they don't feel like, oh, I'm watching this dumbed down thing so that somebody who doesn't watch it get it. Like, there's no beginning part where they're like, kayfabe means blah, blah, blah. And you're like, oh, it's one of these.
Exactly. Exactly. They really struck the perfect tone. And to what you said about like anybody could tune into a Darkside of the Ring episode and get it. My father-in-law, who, if I bring up wrestling, talks to me about Killer Kowalski, and he watched the first episode, called me the next day, and I picked up the phone, and he just goes, I don't think they murdered Gino. I think he just OD'd. I think he just had a bit, he had too much fun, and he OD'd. Like, he watched it as a Dateline, as like a Dateline true crime story. And so just because the anchor is in wrestling, these are big human stories. And so it was really cool to expand on these stories and unpack the stories and get into the making of, because, you watch them and they're so artistic with the recreations. And a big part of our show is talking about how those recreations got made, the conceptualization behind them. And we show a lot of deleted scenes where you kind of get to see the people playing these roles, how they cast those roles, how they taught these people, these actors, how to do wrestling moves, and all that cool stuff that you think about when you watch an episode, but you have no means to find these answers. That was kind of our goal, was to unpack all that while you're watching the show.
It's awesome. Yeah, because those are the questions that are going to come up. But I mean, like, that goes back to the original point, the fact that episode 1 was the Gino Hernandez episode. And I mean, I'm as hardcore a fan as you're going to find. You're as hardcore a fan as anybody's going to find. Like, I don't know about you, but I knew who Gino Hernandez was. I was familiar with his work in the ring,
Because
but
of the mags, by the way.
because of the magazines, absolutely. Absolutely. I didn't sit there and chronicled his career live as it was happening. I didn't have access to it. But I didn't know the Gino Hernandez story. Like, it's a risk. Talk about niche. Talk about, like, this is a pure wrestling story. But it's also just such a good story that not only does it make season 1, but when you go to revisit the docs, it's like, well, we're going to prove that these docs are worth revisiting by going even further in depth into the Gino Hernandez story. And I'm like, I love it. I love that you didn't go with a sexy name. I love that you didn't go with like, here's what really happened with The Rock. Like something that everybody's just, it's like,
Yeah, I mean,
it's the story first.
We debated show order a lot, and it really came down to, I was like, Gino, it's a true crime story. So it doesn't matter that Gino's not this household name. A, it's one of the best episodes they put together. And
I
B,
agree.
The discussion that we had at the table about the Gino story was some of the best. You know, we had some shocking revelations that they couldn't fit into the episode. You know, in one of our deleted scenes, we have Gino's mom for the first time talking about how she was married secretly to Jimmy Snuka for 10 years. Like, head explode.
Yeah.
So it was crazy. So all of that to say, like, we could have led with Screwjob. We could have led with Owen, these sort of huge mainstream names. We could have led with the Road Warriors, but Gino was, I mean, it's such a compelling story.
Yeah.
And for me, I marked out just making the episode, our episode, because it was like names like Chris Adams were coming up, and I was like, ooh, I know who Chris Adams is.
Yes.
You know, and like I'm on phone calls in my profession during the day, during my professional hours, but I'm on phone calls with like Vice lawyers and Vice executives talking about, hey, can we fair use? Like, I'm having fair use legal conversations about pictures of Chris Adams. Like, to me, it was such a mind F, because I was just like, here are the annoying conversations you have to have as a showrunner, as a TV producer, but I'm getting to have those annoying conversations about people like Gentleman Chris Adams and, you know, David Von Erich. Like, it was, and Abdullah the Butcher. Like, it was so, I mean, the amount of emails I had about Abdullah the Butcher footage with like lawyers and executives is just, I never in a million years would have thought that would ever be part of my career.
But it's got to be the funnest thing in the world, because it's not like the email is, oh, they're going to tell me that I can't talk about Chris Adams because who would watch a thing about Gentleman Chris Adams? Like, it's established. Like, of course, it's essential to the story. We're definitely going to talk about Gentleman Chris Adams. It's just these emails are how. So you've already gotten through the hurdle. It's like the rest of it is just fun.
Yeah, I mean, look, I spent a really large part of my career at MTV, where so conversations like, I mean, obviously we're talking about Vice and wrestling, and I'm just saying, if a series like this were on MTV, those questions would have come up of like, I don't know if anybody knows who Baby Doll is. So even though that footage is really cool at the end, where she has her own theory that kind of proves that Gino was murdered, let's not use it, because we don't need to. I don't think people know who she is. Meanwhile, I was just like, we have a piece of footage from Baby Doll? Like, I'm the biggest Dusty Rhodes fan. Shameful is my favorite promo of all time. I get into arguments every year around the anniversary of his passing, that Shameful is a better promo than Hard Times. And it's all about, you know, I watched the Baby Doll turn. I was, you know, I loved, so that was super cool for me that we ended the Gino episode on a deleted scene with Baby Doll. But things like that, it was just so cool that my professional life intersected with this like esoteric knowledge that, like, I'm still to this day, all these years later, I get so fascinated still by just hearing names like Gentleman Chris Adams, Abdullah the Butcher, Carlos Colon. You know, in the Road Warriors episode, we're talking about Paul Ellering and the Midnight Express, and it was really a thrill.
How much did you know about the Gino Hernandez story, other than, you know, kind of the broad strokes, before the documentary came out and before you got involved in all this?
Well, so they credit the seed being planted in their heads to research the Gino story for a possible episode with the Bruce podcast, where the Houston wrestling episode of Something to Wrestle, and Bruce kind of told the story, and then so they were like, okay, that was where the seed was planted. But going into researching the story, there was a very real possibility that once that Evan and Jason, this I'm talking about, Evan and Jason do the research, it just turns out it's a guy who OD'd, and we move on, and there's no story there, and we don't make an episode. But as they traveled down the road, it got shadier and shadier and more conspiratorial, and they found all the conspiracy theories, and it became this huge story. And as for me, I mean, I knew the broad strokes, and then I watched the episode when it originally aired, and I learned, and I had heard the podcast, I watched the episode, and I went into making our episode with that sort of base of knowledge. And now I feel like a bit of a weird expert just because I've watched our episode and their episode like 17 million times. But I have my own theories, the whole thing.
I love all the opinions that end up in these things, though. Like the Montreal episode, I'm sitting there going like, okay, I get doing it because that's going to be a fascinating story. You're always going to find somebody. It's just a fascinating story. And I'm never going to be against listening to somebody tell their perspective of the story again. However, I am going to go in more often than not assuming I already know everything, right? I've got all this information.
Well, they coined the phrase in the episode of Screwjob fatigue. And
right.
We talked about it. We debated, do we do this episode? Because, I mean, it's the first question out of Act 1, because I wrote it, which was, this story has been, I mean, Conrad says, this story has been talked about to death. So why did you guys want to tell it? And their answer was, it's a really good microcosm of the business. So for somebody who doesn't know the story or know how wrestling works, it gives you a window into the backstage politics and the cutthroat, what kayfabe is, the fourth wall, doing favors for somebody on their way out. Like all these tried and true traditions come up in the story of the Montreal Screwjob. So for them, it was almost their like, here is the way of like wink, wink, giving people the here's how wrestling works. To your earlier point of like not just like putting kayfabe on the screen with a dictionary definition. Like this was their way of explaining that to people.
You know what for me made that episode?
Please.
Scott Hall saying it was a work still to this day. I mean, it's like when you're going like, because it's one thing to be like, some people think it's a work, but blah, blah, blah. But when you've got somebody like Scott Hall, who is as knowledgeable as he is, who's in the business as much as he is, who is theoretically is as close to Triple H and Shawn Michaels as he is, going, it's a work, brother. It's a work. I'm like,
he's like watching on a laptop, like, like Michael Jordan in his documentary, but it's a work. But it's, I mean, and everything you just said, I mean, Evan talks about it at the table, which is just like, Scott Hall's part of the clique. Like at any point in the last 15 years or 20 years, he could have just pulled Shawn aside and been like, yeah, or like on a car ride, being like, didn't they all talk about the screw job? Like, how does he think it's a work? And
yeah, but I mean, that's wrestling. That's wrestling. Like that is wrestling. Scott Hall.
But he might be working all of us.
We don't know. But that's wrestling. Like, is he so paranoid that he thinks it's a work still, or is he working us and keeping us paranoid like that? Here's the crazy part. Yeah.
Here's the crazy part. If you watch it, and I implore your audience to go and watch our episode, he kind of makes some sense. Like, why is Kevin Dunn in the camera? Why is he taking the close up of Vince getting spit on?
Yep. It does make sense.
If this is clearly something that's happening off script, wouldn't they cut to the stands? Wouldn't they cut to a crowd shot?
And why do they have that shot? Why do they even have it? Why is there a close-up on Vince's face in that moment?
Wiping the loogie from his eye.
Yeah.
And Scott's like, it's $1 million company, man. Like, you think that? So that's the thing, and it makes you leave that episode being like, I've had all these preconceived notions about the screw job, but I don't know, that kind of makes sense a little bit.
Yeah, I love Scott
He
Hall
was
so
great.
much. Yeah, he's the greatest. Do you guys do an episode on Bruiser Brody? Like, do you revisit that
Oh
Bruiser?
yeah.
Okay,
So Bruiser Brody was the Darkside pilot, and
right.
we did a confidential for Brody, of course. Like it's Evan and Jason's baby.
Right.
They are huge. They're the biggest Brody fans I've ever met. I mean, they have the toys, they have the sweat, they have the t-shirts. They spent they spent so much time with Brody's widow and
Yeah.
Brody's son. I will a bit of a spoiler alert, but I think it's coming in 3 weeks. The deleted scenes, the extras, the bonus clips, the bonus clip we have of their time at Abdullah the Butcher's house. Some of the most compelling stuff in the series. It's so, I mean, look, Brody is a very tough subject because it's so tragic. And so part of it was, how do we lighten the mood? And luckily we had some of this like really compelling, funny footage of the day they spent with Abdullah the Butcher at his house. I mean, I'll give something away. He basically, and you'll see the clip in the show, he chases Jason with a pair of scissors in his mouth. I mean, he has a walker. He's like 300 pounds. He's got a walker, but he's chasing Jason with a pair of scissors in, like never dropping the gimmick.
That's awesome.
In his 70s, like he can relax now. But at no point did he drop the gimmick. And so the Brody episode is really, really special to those guys, and it's special to me. I mean, we have the special guest in that episode is Savio Vega, who tells a really sort of fly on the wall his version, because he was in the locker room. He was TNT in Puerto Rico at the time.
Yeah.
Like he was at the mirror in the bathroom putting his face paint on when the whole thing went down. So he tells that story, which didn't, obviously that wasn't in the episode. So really, really cool stuff to, again, expand on the original hour that they put together. We put together an extra 30 minutes of, hey, wait, what happened at that point? And what did he say? And tell us about Tony Atlas, and why didn't the cops show up sooner? And what happened in the trial? What happened to the murder weapon? All those questions that when you watch a true crime story,
Yeah.
you can only go to Wikipedia to get some answers. Now you kind of get the answers immediately.
Yeah, I mean, but it's also with that one, I loved it because I mean, I'm a huge Brody fan myself. But I also found it really interesting that there were people involved in that one that still wouldn't talk.
Yeah.
Because of how, because there's still people alive that were theoretically involved that certain people don't want to cross in the wrong way.
Jose Gonzalez went on to have a very fruitful career.
Yeah.
Tried to make an angle out of it in Japan. Like this story it's really, really insane. And like the shadiness that went on with the trial, with all the American wrestlers who were in the locker room at the time, they all got their subpoenas like a week after the trial, and just like it's just so corrupt, so much corruption, and dudes like Carlos Colon and Jose Gonzalez just are and to an extent, Abdullah the Butcher. Like I think all these dudes know more than they'll ever say while they're breathing.
Yeah. Then that's my point, that with stuff like that as fascinating as it all is, it must also get frustrating at points when you know that there's more here. Like, in your search, you're like, I found the person who knows, but they will never say,
Yeah. And it's such a wild story. I mean, look, that episode really becomes the Tony Atlas story, because so much of the episode on the back half focuses on Tony, and sort of he's reliving it in the documentary interview. Like you can see he's affected by telling this story. He wants to get it out. And we show footage of him like begging them to be like, guys, I need to tell this story. I've been sitting on it my whole life. He's so affected by it to this day. It's like PTSD when they ask him certain questions. And so it's still, I mean, it's like I said, one of the more tragic stories. That and obviously doing Owen it was such a hard episode to do in our format, because it's like, we're 30 extra minutes, we're chatting, we're talking. We don't want to just talk about sad stuff. We don't want to just talk about how tragic it is. How can we have a little bit of fun? Luckily, Owen has the side to him of like, everybody's got a great Owen Rib story. There's all that fun stuff of Owen. And so you'll see, we overtly say at the table, like, we're going to switch gears here from the really tragic story and try to lighten the mood here. And we get into some of the ribbing and a bunch of wrestlers have remembrances of Owen in the episode. It's really sweet and really special, especially Blue Meanie at the end, who's our live special guest.
Yeah, that's great, and I'm glad Blue Meanie is the live special guest too, because I love the choice to do the show at the old ECW arena. What's it called, the 2300 arena now?
2300. I can tell that story. So in pre-production, this was end of November, beginning of December. And our shoot was going to be middle to end of December. If you remember, pre-holiday major COVID spike.
Right.
Now, we were supposed to shoot in a warehouse in Brooklyn, like a nondescript documentary style warehouse, gray columns, big windows, like a regular,
like the
true crime, detective interview.
Like the opening to the Raw's War video game for PlayStation.
Exactly.
Yeah.
100%. So we were slated to shoot in like a nondescript warehouse in Brooklyn, but when the COVID spike happened, the rules we had to get Jason from Canada to New York.
Right.
Jason Eisner. And so the rules for somebody coming from out of the country into this, not just the United States, but into New York, were downright impossible. And so we quickly had to pivot to Philly. So my production manager calls me, tells me all of this, and says, we're pivoting to Philly. We're scouting. We're going to scout locations. And I said, dude, I have the location. If we're going to Philly, I'm from Philly. So like, I know immediately I was just like, call the 2300 arena. I mean, we're doing the New Jack story. Like, we have to shoot in the ECW arena. And luckily, because of COVID, they were like shut down. Like, they weren't having events. So
right.
We never would have gotten in if they were, up and running. So it was a bunch of like, wink, wink, thankful, it's one of the like thankful, thank God for the pandemic, only because it gave us the opportunity to shoot at the ECW arena, which is so surreal, especially doing New Jack, which he had spilled blood like on the spot where we were sitting.
Yeah. So what are the 8 episodes that we're revisiting for Confidential? We did Gino Hernandez.
Gino was our premiere. We did Screwjob.
Yep.
This week coming up is the Von Erichs, which is just like a dream come true to be talking about that family.
Yeah.
Again, super tragic episode, but really, really cool, fascinating details that the guys found out and talk about. Brody, New Jack, Owen, Herb, and the Road Warriors.
So the Road Warriors,
8.
That's 8. Yeah, that makes sense. The Road Warriors one is interesting to me because the Road Warriors one I felt more than, and maybe it's just because I know the Road Warriors so well, but I felt like there's so much more to cover. That was one of them. I actually felt that way about New Jack a little bit too, and maybe that's because the Road Warriors and New Jack were both more kind of full picture things, not about a specific event. Like the Gino Hernandez story, while we set up who Gino Hernandez is and we talk about the background, realistically, it is about the mysterious way in which he died. The Bruiser Brody documentary, while it is about Brody, realistically, it's about the circumstances in which he died. I feel like the Road Warriors and New Jack, it's more kind of an overarching view of those two, and I feel like for somebody in your position that's like, okay, we got to get another 30 minutes of content out of this, I feel like those two stories specifically, you must have had a lot, Road Warriors more than New Jack, a lot of room to play.
Yeah, so there's sort of 2 types of Darkside episodes. There's there's sort of career looks, which is like, this is the life of somebody who led a tragic life. And then there are, this was an event that had tragic consequences. So, you know, like we didn't do Brawl for All, but Brawl for All is you know, you look at that, you're just like, oh, that was just like a weird match. Like, why are they doing a documentary about that? But there's a tragic story, that the fallout. So basically, it's like stories of like things that happened, and stories of like people's lives that ended up tragic or were tragic. In the case of the Road Warriors, the top line for me to sort of tease that people need to watch this is, it's really, I don't have this for sure, but it's probably the last on camera, telling of the story of the Road Warriors by Joe Laurinaitis before he passes away. I mean, they made the episode, and a few months later he passed away, and then here we come making Confidential, and we have all of this unused footage and all this like sort of amazing sort of prophetic stuff, footage of Joe talking about Hawk, and he and Hawk and their relationship, and it all takes on all this new meaning because he has not since passed away, and now we don't have any of the Road Warriors, and so that episode takes on like a really new important meaning when you watch it.
Yeah, that's wild. I didn't even really think of that, but that's completely true. And the Road Warriors too, they're so interesting because, you hear Road Warriors pop and like all these references. And if you're a kid watching WWF at the time and the Legion of Doom, like, and that's kind of your exposure to them, you don't even realize that like people don't even look at that. People look at that as the like kind of downside of their career. You know what I mean? Like the Road Warriors career, people look at the peak of Road Warriors as like 80s Crockett Road Warriors.
Yeah, but they had those huge shows in WWE. The motorcycle down to the ring, and that story is told in the episode. But what's interesting, again, I wrote the scripts, and so like the questions asked at the table, like, what did you guys think of when the Road Warriors changed their name and showed up on WWF TV as the Legion of Doom?
Mm-hmm.
And Evan's answer is like, we're of the age where like that was prime fandom for us. So to us, like the Road Warriors are the Legion of Doom.
Same.
But making this episode made them watch all of the Road Warriors footage. And now they have this like new appreciation for like the black shoulder pads era and the chains era, as opposed to the red shoulder pads and the Legion of Doom era. And so we kind of like live vicariously through Evan and Jason, like becoming new fans of the Road Warriors, even though they're already huge fans of them to begin with.
Yeah.
And you get to kind of like hear about all of that. Like they're huge Road Warriors fans, and we have like these cool moments of like, they had custom shoulder pads made for the reenactment actors. And so of course Evan and Jason tried them on, and we tell that story. And Evan and Jason like legit wear Zubaz pants like out in public in 2021. Like that's how like they have the Road Warriors, the AWA Road Warriors wrestling figures that they like, look to as like, prized possessions. Like they're the real deal in terms of like markety mark.
Oh yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I assumed Herb Abrams was going to be one of the people that you took another look at, but now I like it even more that I think it was Evan that was wearing his UWF sweatshirt on like one of the episodes, and I love it even more that he's just rocking his UWF sweatshirt.
Every episode they rep the Darkside of the Ring Pro Wrestling Tees line.
Smart.
They got I don't know the exact details, but in making these episodes, they got some of the families to sort of work on it, get them deals with Pro Wrestling Tees to recreate some of this iconic imagery into t-shirts and sweatshirts. And so they rep all that at the table in every episode. So you'll see Evan in a woman sweatshirt, the Road Warriors sweatshirt that Jason wears. There's the Harley Race shirt that actually Tony Atlas drew that they use that drawing on the T-shirt. So it's really, really, really cool stuff. But in terms of Herb Abrams, to be perfectly honest, I didn't know that story. I knew about the UW that version of the UWF,
Yeah.
but I didn't know Herb Abrams. I didn't know the story of Cocaine and Cowboy Boots. I didn't know any of it. So watching the episode, I was just like, holy crap. And then obviously getting to make our episode, like really learning and really getting into it and finding out where all his money came from and hearing about the main events of his, like the pay-per-views were terrible, but the matches were actually kind of great if you look back at the talent. And we have like Mick Foley talking extensively, more than he does in the episode, about how he basically credits Herb Abrams in the UWF for giving him the reps enough to figure out who he is as a character and give him the reps on the mic to figure out how to be what we eventually learned was Cactus Jack and Mankind. Like, you know, we talk about Mick Foley today as one of the best on the mic of all time. He learned how to do that only because Herb Abrams was like, yeah, go cut a 20-minute promo.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Because like, you know, the school that he went to was, no, just go out there and do whatever you want. So you
drop your elbow off the apron and you know, take years off your life. But no, we do not want to hear Cactus Jack talk. It wasn't until, you know, the casino, the blackjack brawl, where, you know, Mick Foley got to talk.
Yeah. Yeah. And then he ends up like going on to be a promo guy. Like
the like go-to, you know, emotional promo guy in history.
I mean, I think the only reason the Mankind character worked in the very first of all, okay, there's two reasons I think the Mankind character worked, especially in the evolution of it. Number one, the debut worked because his promos were actually really good from the basement. Like the vignettes when he was like playing with the rat and he was like on his way to the WWE, because he believed it. Like he had that like that high pitched like shrill in his voice. Yeah. And then his ability to, through promos more so than wrestling, evolved the character to the point where he's just kind of this like lovable, weird oaf that has this paternal love for Vince when he like hugs him and thanks, Dad. And it's just like but it's tough to do that if you're anybody besides Mick Foley, because you somehow have to convince an audience over the course of a couple years that it makes sense that character would now be doing this.
Yeah, and that, you know, and that promo he cuts at the end of his ECW run. Is, you know, it's just like he doesn't cut that promo if he doesn't have the stage to learn how to emote on camera in the in this like fledgling, you know, money pit of the UWF. So it's really just cool to hear that perspective from Mick, and he speaks so honestly about it, while like, you know, the Herb episode's interesting because while there's tragedy, everyone across the board, even all of these people are people who, like, you know, never got their full payoffs, and you know, all this sort of like shade. They dealt with the shady side of him.
Yeah.
But every wrestler that they talked to for this story across the board had like such an appreciation for Herb, and like legit thought he was an innovator and a legend.
Yeah, because they liked him. It's not like they didn't.
Yeah, he's a very likable guy.
Like him, they liked him, and that happens sometimes. I love people like that. Do you have a favorite episode of the Confidential series of Darkside of the Ring Confidential?
It's so funny. I just told you that of all the stories we did, the one I knew the least about was Herb.
Mm-hmm.
The Herb episode is that's our last episode that will air.
Mm-hmm.
And basically the way our format works is we have a bunch of, you know, leading into every act, we have about a 30 to 45 second, you know, burst at the table. Then you see the act play out, and then we come back to the table for like a minute and a half, 2 minutes of unpacking what you just watched, rinse and repeat. But twice during the hour and a half, you get a full act, which is about five minutes plus of just straight talk, and one in the middle of the episode and one after the episode concludes. In the Herb episode, the Act 8 after the episode is over, we stay at the table. That whole act we use as sort of for behind the scenes. Let's look at sort of how we made this, and we're looking at how those guys made the recreations of like naked Herb Abrams running, greased up with body oil and cocaine and all that stuff. And so, and also we do a whole package on the cameos that are in the recreations. Like Evan and Jason basically end up playing a bunch of the characters in the recreations. And so all of that to say, for like the really cool look at the BTS of the making of this amazing series that's going into season 3 this summer, the end of the Herb Abrams episode is my favorite chunk of anything that we've made, across, from start to finish. But obviously we've talked about it ad nauseum, but Gino, Von Erichs, and Brody for me are just like really special, just because the surrealness and my personal being incredulous to the fact of like the fact that I got to talk about these stories in my professional life.
Yeah.
And got to put more of this story out there, and just like spend my days like balancing raising my crazy 2-year-old and making him lunch, but also like taking calls about the scaffold match with the Midnight Express, and looking for the footage of seeing if we could clear the footage of Jim Cornette falling off the scaffold and breaking both of his, and busting both of his legs. Just like having those conversations during work hours, like just blew my mind.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
I mean, it's so like
long answer to an easy question.
No, I love it. I love it. And every time I talk to Evan and Jason, I always end up leaving the conversation with this like feeling that I'm in the wrong field of work, because I get so jealous that what they get to do is for each of these things, they get to kind of just completely engulf their life for a period of time.
Yeah.
In whatever they're talking about. Like, I just get so jealous that they just get to become the Von Erichs. Like it's just their entire life, for whatever amount of time they're going to be shooting this episode, everything is Von Erich. And I would love to have an excuse, a professional excuse, to just rotate my life around something that specific and something that cool that I love so much.
Yeah, those guys are the real deal. I mean, I'm so grateful to be a small part of the sort of universe that they've created. But as you said, those guys live it, man. Those guys travel in an RV from city to city for whatever story that they're telling, and they're spending time with these families that haven't talked about these tragedies in a number of years. They're bringing up really tough subjects to talk about. They're getting these people to like, open up to them. They're really doing incredible documentary work, and it just so happens that the work that they're doing is on these stories that are like tangential to all these sort of these wrestling legends that we grew up like being fascinated with. So it's just a really insane Venn diagram of like all of my interests of like wrestling, the territories, the mag, that whole world, and then true crime, TV production, all that stuff like merged into one. For me, it was such a labor of love and a thrill, and I'm psyched for people to watch it. And if you haven't watched, it's Tuesday nights at 9 on Vice, and the episodes post to YouTube, and
all the episodes are posting to YouTube
eventually. Yeah,
that's awesome.
A couple days after they air,
yeah,
they end up because they have the Darkside of the Ring YouTube channel, so
that's great.
They all end up there.
Did you, I mean, as big a fan as you are, I know that I have suggested multiple topics to Evan and Jason, because that's just what you do, right? Like, I'm like, and it's because you realize, like, oh, if they take this and, like, all I want them to do is take the advice so that maybe I could see a cool documentary. Like, I've texted them multiple times going, like, guys, we got to do an Onita episode. Like, when is the Onita episode, please? And Onita, I would die for a Hayabusa episode. I mean, maybe you could combine them. I don't know. But did you
The whole season, dude. I mean, honestly, I was looking at my phone as you were talking because my last text to Evan was on Tuesday at 10:30 in the morning. I said, "Hey, I just got back from walking my dog." So I said, "Hey, listening to Jericho's chat with Shivani and Meltzer about Jim Crockett, and there's a Dark Side of the Ring in the story they tell about Starrcade versus Survivor Series in '87 and how Vince sabotaged the NWA. They even call it the Starrcade sabotage."
That would be a great one.
All I do is send him texts like that about like, you got to do the Grahams. You got to do Mike Graham and Eddie Graham.
Yeah.
And then I'll be like, a friend of mine saw that I posted about the show, and a friend from high school, he's like, they got to do Ricky Dozan. He was killed by the Japanese mafia, and yeah, that was one of the cool parts about becoming friends with Evan and Jason is I have a direct line to be like, what do you think of this? Like, dude, I read these like pro wrestling. I forget. They end up in my Twitter feed, but they're these like sort of longer stories about fun things with wrestling. But anyway, it was the story of Renegade.
Oh,
WCW.
Yeah, of course.
And how basically like he got buried to the point of it leading to his depression and his ultimate death. And I was like, there's a story in Renegade of like this guy who was like a rookie who is like meant to fill the shoes of Ultimate Warrior and obviously gets crapped on, from the shoot.
Yeah.
And so I've sent the Renegade. I said the Grahams. They're doing what's his name from the Jersey Triad. I'm having a brain fart. The dude from New Jersey.
Nick Gage?
No. Who better than Canyon? They're doing Canyon.
Oh,
Canyon
Chris Canyon.
Was one of the first names I said. I was like, you got to do Canyon. They were like, wink, wink. We're already doing it. So I hope I'm not breaking news there because they'll kill me. But I'm pretty sure that the third season names have been announced.
Yeah, I think they have too. And I also feel like they've had a lot of trouble now that everybody's obsessed with it. They've had a lot of trouble keeping their topics from leaking. Like over the summer, David Arquette was on the Sirius XM show, and he's like, that's when he was like, yeah, and I just am doing an interview because they're doing a Dark Side of the Ring about Nick Gage, and I'm like, they haven't even announced they're doing a season 3, David.
Yeah, I know. That's why I just was like, oh, did I just step in it? But
no, that's announced. They said they're doing Pillman, which is amazing. FMW. So I'm assuming the Onita story will be XPW, Nick Gage, Collision in Korea. That's going to be awesome. The Smith family, Grizzly, and Jake Roberts and all that.
And Sam Houston, yeah.
Bruiser Bedlam, which is amazing. Chris Canyon and the Dynamite Kid.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think there's a couple more that haven't been officially announced, but yeah. So you can see like they're evolving now too. So they're not just going to talk about an event or a person. They're going to talk about a whole organization.
Yeah. I can't wait till this XPW episode. I mean, the XPW episode, anybody that was following, because, I was a little high school deathmatch fanatic. So like
this is stuff like I don't even know about. So I'm excited to see the XPW and the FMW and Nick Gage, because I don't know, but that's like a part of wrestling that like I've never dipped my toe into, and so I'm excited to learn about those stories, and I know they're super excited to tell them.
Yeah, it's gonna be be great, man. But I'm really excited that the Dark Side of the Ring Confidential is a thing, just because I think I'm like most fans, where it's like there's just so much meat on the bone of all of this stuff. Conrad is obviously fantastic.
We didn't even talk about that. The host of Confidential is Conrad Thompson. He drove up from Alabama. Again, we were in the middle of a COVID spike. So he didn't get on a plane. He drove up from Alabama, spent 2 days with us in Philadelphia. We did 4 episodes a day. The dude doesn't really have TV hosting experience, and he just jumped in that chair.
He's excellent.
Crushed it.
He's excellent.
I mean, he was better without teleprompter at vamping and just looking at a page and looking up and being fluid than a lot of seasoned hosts that I've worked with. I mean, I told him, I kept telling him, I was just like, man, you have a career in this. So he's like, I'm busy enough as it is. But Conrad's the man, dude.
Yeah.
He really so much effort put into helping us tell these stories, and the trust that Evan and Jason had with Conrad to be at the table with him. That was super cool. And obviously just to spend time with that dude who has like every wrestler's phone number in his phone. And he's got stories on stories on stories. And I'm a huge Flair mark, so getting to ask him some questions about his father-in-law. So it was just really cool. And shout out to Conrad for that. But yeah, so Conrad's the host. Evan and Jason are at the table. And like I said, we add 30 extra minutes to the hour-long episode. So you get the full episode, but you get hour chunks before and after every act. And it just all the lingering questions you have while watching a documentary. We're giving you the answers to those questions immediately.
And it leaves me with confidence in the series, right? Like when the host is Conrad, like I know Conrad, he's a fan. Like
you immediately have buy-in because you're like, oh yeah, he knows what he's talking about.
He knows what he's talking about. Evan and Jason, like I know that they are like, they live and die by this. You're behind the scenes. I know you live and die by this. And it's like, yes, this is what this is supposed to be. We're going deep in the wrestling archive to tell these stories that we wrestling fans know are just great stories regardless of wrestling. But it does take somebody who has it in their blood, I think, to really tell the story right. And I think that's happening, and I'm happy that it's happening more. So I hope that everybody's tuning in Tuesdays at 9 p.m. on Vice. And you're checking it out. If you haven't seen any of them yet, go back and watch. I know the Gino Hernandez episode is definitely up, and you get the whole Dark Side of the Ring episode too, which is not bad. So that's up on YouTube, and I is the Montreal episode up on YouTube as well?
I believe it is. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, there was a funny moment. There's a funny moment in that Montreal episode where Earl Hebner, he does indeed confirm that he's to this day, it weighs on him so much, and he's still so paranoid about all this that he was worried that Jason and Evan it was a ruse, it was a hoax, and they were going to kill him for his role.
He thought it was the setup to a hit. Like, that's how paranoid that, like a mob hit, like a Canadian mob hit. He thought those dudes were coming down from Canada because he was told Jason, he's this director from Canada. He thought they were Canadian mobsters coming to kill him. And he had called his friend on the police force to be like, hey, can you watch my back? I'm going to meet these guys at this hotel, yada, yada. Like, we show that footage, which of course didn't make the episode, but like we have it in the can, and we show it as a bonus clip of like his paranoia taking over. Like, he lives it all these years later. So again, like all those cool little extras that you get is just icing on the cake of obviously the answers to the lingering questions and the BTS, the behind the scenes stuff and the making of the episode. But you also get these like really cool moments that they captured on camera, like almost by accident.
So cool. So I think I'm going to go right now and just watch a whole bunch of episodes of Dark Side of the Ring. That tends to be what happens when I have these conversations. But I appreciate you, man. This was great.
I'll just say one last thing because of what you just said. I just special shout out to the wrestling community at large, this sort of Twitter community. Mm-hmm. Everybody has been so cool and so supportive. Once I kind of like put out there on social media that like I got to work on this show. Everybody's been so cool with congratulations and questions and just like, fist bumps and stuff like that. So I love this like nerdy wrestling community that we all argue all day about stupid stuff. And we all like, crap on each other's opinions, and some of us like AEW, some of us don't, some of us like WWE, some of us don't, and we get so passionate, but at the end of the day, like everyone's so supportive of everybody else. And so big shout out to all the wrestling fans. Thank you. And obviously thank you, Sam. I appreciate the platform.
Absolutely, man. Anytime.